How can you practice pacing? I can't keep the same pace for X number of miles. There are two ways to practice pacing. There are two things that go into pacing, two main things. One is skill. It takes practice. The more often you run at certain paces, the better you get at actually pacing yourself. The other one is discipline. You could be perfectly capable of pacing yourself, but you have a lapse in discipline and therefore you don't pace yourself that day, even though you could have if you wanted to and you know how to. The best way to practice it is to do it in training. So hopefully whatever running, training, or programming that you're doing right now has some form of ways to gauge your paces for certain runs. In most cases, you want to, at least for a more novice runner, or honestly for anyone besides like very, very high level runners who have like super specific pacing strategies that they use. But generally, if you're more novice, you want to aim for negative splits in most of your runs. Maybe not your slow runs, but definitely your tempo work, your speed work, and runs like that are harder, you're going to be running at a pace similar to what you're actually going to be tested on. Say you're training for a 5 mile. So say you're running a 4 mile tempo run and you go out and you're supposed to hit like a 750 pace on average. A lot of people would go out and they would hit a 730 pace on the first mile, and then they hit a 750 pace on the second mile, and then like at 815 pace on the third mile, and then like at 850 pace just hanging on for dear life on the last mile. You're really not getting much of an adaptation from that. You'd be much better off going a little bit slower at first, maybe shooting for an 8-minute mile, then a 757, then a 755, then a 753 or something like that. Even if it's a little higher than the pace that you originally aimed for, you are practicing pacing yourself by not blowing your load at the beginning and just going way past your threshold and just hanging on for dear life and hanging out in the pain cave. And that run feels like a time trial at the end. And also you're just not pleased with your pacing at all or your overall finishing time. So practicing, leaving some gas in the tank at the beginning, the more you do it, the easier it's going to be. You're going to get a feel for what it feels like to start a tempo run. The first mile of a tempo run is not going to feel the same as the last mile of that tempo run. You're going to be more fatigued in that last mile. A lot of people will try and get to that like level of fatigue early on and just hang on to it. Maybe they don't try that, but they just subconsciously do it. Tempo run should be like a 6 RPE at the beginning and then maybe like an 8, 7.5, 8 towards the end. It shouldn't be a 7.7 the entire time. Additionally, with repeats, say you're doing 5 800-meter repeats with a certain pace range. Say your pace range is 310 to 315 per 800. What you'd want to do is try and start a little bit slow, maybe start towards that 315 range, either match or slightly beat the previous lap with your next lap. So say you run 815, then maybe you run an 814, then maybe you run an 812, then another 812. That last one, you can go a little bit faster. Hopefully, if you've been pacing yourself and sticking to a realistic pacing strategy that you're capable of, we're just assuming that 815 you are capable of doing 5 times in a row. You should have enough gas in the tank for that last one to go a little bit faster. Not all out, not crazy fast, but maybe you finish that last one in 810. So you did 815, 814, 2 812s, and a 810. So that is a nice, solid negative split, and you're just getting better at leaving some gas in the tank and slowly increasing over time. That is the skill component. To go off a recent run, say you just did a recent time trial and your pacing was just terrible, what you can do is add them all together, find the average pace, and that's kind of the pace you want to sort of shoot for maintaining. So say you run a 5-minute time trial and your finishing time was 40 minutes, but this math is not going to add up. But say you ran a 7-minute mile, then a 745, then a 815, then another 815, then maybe like a 850, just hanging on for dear life, maybe a little faster towards the end. What you can do is just find your per mile pace, and that's the pace you want to shoot for as your tempo pace. You're going to go a little slower than your tempo run in your training, but going into your next 5 mile, maybe last time, even though your splits were way, way, way crazy across the board, that your average split was a 750 split. When you start that run, start with your 750 and then leave gas in the tank for later on where you can speed up. Almost every single record ever set in any distance run has been on a negative split. So that means the first half of the run was a little slower than the second half. There are professional runners that are capable of running nice controlled positive splits, but in most cases, it's usually not a great idea. Once you get a little bit of a step further than going slow at the beginning and speeding up, you can start strong and finish strong. So pretty much your first and last mile are your two best miles. Say you're doing a 5 mile and you are shooting for a 35-minute 5 mile. That would be a 7-minute mile. Say you run the first mile in 6:50, second and third mile in 7 minutes, maybe 7:05. Fourth mile, maybe slightly faster, 7:02, 7 minutes. And then you finish strong with like a 6:55 mile if you're capable. And you probably beat your time by a little bit. I didn't really keep track of the math there, but that would probably be a little bit under 35, as opposed to just going way too fast at the beginning, which most people do. Another discipline aspect is watching other people around you. If you're running with a bunch of other people that you don't know how fast they are, this is super common at selection. Everyone takes off out the gates. Everybody almost takes off out the gates. So when you're paying attention to all these other people that just shoot out the gates, there's probably a handful or so of guys that shoot out the gates and you're never going to see them again because they just know they're really good runners. You're not going to see them again. You might notice if you're disciplined at the beginning and you don't take off and you trust your own pacing because you've practiced it so many times and you know what it feels like, even if you don't have a watch on, you're mindful enough to know what it feels like. You stick with your own pacing. You're going to notice that most of the guys that take out the gate, you're going to pass eventually because they didn't pace themselves and you did. So that's another aspect of the discipline. That's beyond just doing it in your own training, being disciplined enough to stick to your paces, but also when you're around other people, just adds another factor and makes it harder to stick to. So that is my best advice on the pacing thing. Build that skill by practicing. And then from there, it's all discipline.